Hi, I'm Fernan Shu. When my wife's family called me a gold digger at her father's funeral, I stayed silent. When they laughed about how I'd get nothing from the will, I held my tongue. When they planned to kick me out of the house I'd helped build with my own hands, I didn't fight back. But what they didn't know was that the old man had seen everything. And what he left me in that will didn't just change my life, it destroyed theirs. Want to know how a carpenter from the wrong side of town became the owner of everything they thought belonged to them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other Tuesday in March. I was already up at 5:30, coffee brewing in the small kitchen of our modest house on Maple Street, when Elena stumbled downstairs in her silk robe. She never woke up this early unless something was wrong. Her phone was pressed against her ear, and I could hear her mother's shrill voice bleeding through the speaker even from across the room. "Papa's in the hospital," she said, hanging up. Her face was pale, but there was something else there. Relief, maybe? Or calculation? "It's his heart. They don't think he has long." I set down my coffee mug and reached for my work jacket. "I'll drive you there." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. She softened her tone. "I mean, you have that big project today, the Hendersons' kitchen renovation. You can't afford to miss that." She was right about the money. As a carpenter running my own small business, every job mattered. But this was her father, the man who'd built the construction empire that put food on tables across 3 counties, the man who'd always treated me with a respect his family never showed. "The Hendersons can wait, Elena. This is family." She turned away, busying herself with the coffee maker. "Just meet us at the house later, after visiting hours." The Ramirez family estate sat on 40 acres of pristine land overlooking Lake Morrison. I'd driven past it countless times as a kid, never imagining I'd one day marry into the family that owned it. The main house was a sprawling Spanish colonial with red tile roofs and arched windows that caught the evening light like amber. Gardens stretched in perfect geometric patterns, maintained by a team of landscapers who cost more per month than most people made in a year. I pulled my weathered pickup truck through the iron gates, parking between Elena's BMW and her brother Miguel's Mercedes. The contrast wasn't lost on me. It never was. Inside, the family had gathered in the formal living room. Elena's mother, Carmen, held court from her usual spot on the white leather sofa, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Miguel paced by the fireplace, already dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Elena's sister Sophia sat curled in the wingback chair, typing furiously on her phone. "Fernan," Carmen said without looking up, "how thoughtful of you to join us." The words dripped with the same condescension I'd grown accustomed to over the past 3 years of marriage. To Carmen, I would always be the nobody who'd somehow convinced her daughter to settle for less. "How is he?" I asked, hanging my jacket on the coat rack. "Stable, for now," Miguel answered. "The doctors say it could be days, could be weeks. His heart is just worn out." I nodded, taking a seat on the edge of the room. Even in their grief, there was an invisible line I wasn't supposed to cross. I was family by marriage, but not by blood. Not really. "We need to discuss arrangements," Carmen continued. "The business, the properties, the foundation. Miguel, you'll need to meet with the lawyers tomorrow." "Already scheduled," he replied. "Though I imagine most of it's pretty straightforward. Papa always said the company would stay in the family." Sophia looked up from her phone. "What about the house? Elena, you and Fernan will need to find somewhere else to live eventually. This place is too big for just the 2 of you." Elena's cheeks flushed. "Sophia, we don't need to discuss this now." "Actually, we do," Carmen interjected. "Your father has been too generous, letting you 2 live in the guest house all this time. But with his medical bills and the estate taxes we'll face, we'll need to make some difficult decisions." The guest house. That's what they called the perfectly lovely 3-bedroom home where Elena and I had lived since our wedding. It sat on the same property as the main house, but it had been my sanctuary. The place where I'd built custom cabinets for Elena's art supplies, where I'd installed hardwood floors with my own hands, where we'd planned to raise children someday. "We understand," I said quietly. "When the time comes, we'll figure something out." Miguel stopped pacing. "It's nothing personal, Fernan. It's just business. The property taxes alone on this place could bankrupt most people." It was always about money with them. Everything reduced to numbers on a balance sheet, including me. They'd never forgiven Elena for marrying a carpenter instead of one of the lawyers or doctors or business heirs they'd paraded in front of her for years. I excused myself early, claiming I had to prepare for the next day's work. The truth was, I couldn't stomach any more talk about dividing up possessions while the old man was still breathing. Don Roberto had been the only one in that family who'd ever looked at me and seen a man worth knowing, not just an obstacle to their social ambitions. The next morning brought the call I'd been dreading. Elena's voice was hollow when she told me her father had passed peacefully in his sleep. The funeral arrangements began immediately, a whirlwind of decisions about flowers and catering and guest lists that somehow never seemed to include my input. I spent the day in my workshop, building a small wooden cross from a piece of oak I'd been saving for something special. Don Roberto had always admired my woodwork, often stopping by when I was building something to ask about my techniques. He'd grown up poor, he told me once, and he never forgot the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with his own hands. The viewing was held at the most expensive funeral home in the city. I arrived in my only suit, a navy blue one I'd bought for my wedding. It was still the nicest thing I owned, though it looked shabby next to the designer clothes worn by everyone else in attendance. The line to pay respect stretched around the block. Don Roberto had been a pillar of the community, employing hundreds of people and donating generously to local charities. I waited my turn like everyone else, even though I was family. That's just how it was. When I finally reached the casket, I placed the wooden cross inside, tucked discreetly where only he would know it was there. "Thank you for seeing me, for all of it." Carmen appeared at my elbow. "What is that thing?" "Something I made for him." She frowned. "This is a high-end service, Fernan. We can't have homemade crafts cluttering the arrangement." Before I could respond, she reached in and removed the cross, handing it back to me. "Perhaps you could keep this as a memento instead." The heat rose in my cheeks, but I took the cross without a word. Around us, the conversations continued, people sharing memories of Don Roberto's generosity and business acumen. No one mentioned how he'd spent Saturday mornings teaching his grandson Miguel to fish, or how he'd quietly paid for 3 different families' medical bills when they couldn't afford treatment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. They talked about his legacy as if it could be measured in quarterly reports. The funeral itself was a production worthy of a head of state. The church overflowed with mourners, politicians, business leaders, and community members whose lives had been touched by Don Roberto's kindness. The bishop presided over the service, delivering a homily about a life well lived and a man who'd never forgotten his humble beginnings. I sat in the family section, but in the back row. Elena held my hand during the service, the first real affection she'd shown me in weeks. Her grief was genuine, I knew. She'd loved her father, even if she'd never understood why he'd approved of me when the rest of them didn't. After the burial, the family gathered back at the main house for the reading of the will. Carmen had arranged for refreshments to be served, though the mood was appropriately somber. I helped carry chairs from storage, setting up the formal dining room to accommodate everyone who needed to be present. The lawyer, a distinguished man named Harold Fitzgerald, arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than I was. He'd been the Ramirez family attorney for over 20 years, handling everything from business contracts to divorce settlements. "Thank you all for being here during this difficult time," he began, setting his papers on the mahogany table. Roberto was very specific about his wishes, and he updated his will just last month to ensure everything was in order. Carmen dabbed her eyes again. He was always so thoughtful about details. Miguel leaned forward. "Should we start with the business holdings?" "Actually," Fitzgerald said, adjusting his glasses, "Roberto wanted me to read the will in its entirety, in the order he wrote it." He felt it was important that everyone understand his reasoning. He began with the smaller bequests, charitable donations to the local children's hospital, the food bank, and the scholarship fund he'd established for underprivileged students. Each gift was substantial, reflecting a lifetime of success and generosity. To my beloved daughter Sophia, I leave the portfolio of rental properties downtown along with the summer cottage in Aspen. May you find the peace there that has sometimes eluded you here. Sophia smiled through her tears. The rental properties alone were worth millions. To my son Miguel, I leave my interest in the construction company, along with the equipment and contracts necessary to continue our family's legacy of building homes and communities. Miguel nodded solemnly. It was what everyone had expected. He'd been groomed for this role his entire life. To my wife Carmen, I leave the main house and the surrounding 10 acres, along with a trust fund sufficient to maintain your lifestyle for the remainder of your life. Carmen's relief was visible. The house was her domain, her source of social status and identity. Then Fitzgerald paused, looking directly at Elena. To my daughter Elena, I leave my personal investment portfolio, my art collection, and my blessing for whatever path she chooses in life. Elena squeezed my hand. The investments were substantial, enough to secure her future regardless of what happened with our marriage. And finally, Fitzgerald continued, to my son-in-law Fernan Shu, I leave the remaining 30 acres of land, including all mineral rights, water rights, and development potential. I also leave him my personal workshop, my collection of vintage tools, and the red oak tree under which he and Elena were married. The room fell silent. I felt Elena's hand slip from mine. I'm sorry, Miguel said, standing up. Could you repeat that? Fitzgerald's voice remained steady. Fernan inherits the majority of the undeveloped land, along with all associated rights and potential. Carmen's face had gone white. That's impossible. The land has been in our family for generations. Which is precisely why Roberto wanted it to go to someone who would appreciate its true value, Fitzgerald replied. He left a letter explaining his decision. Would you like me to read it? The silence stretched uncomfortably until Miguel finally nodded. Fitzgerald unfolded a single sheet of paper written in Don Roberto's careful handwriting. My dear family, by now you know that I have chosen to leave the majority of our land to Fernan. This decision was not made lightly, nor was it made in haste. Over the past 3 years, I have watched this young man work with his hands to build something meaningful. I have seen him treat Elena with kindness and respect, even when others in our family have not extended him the same courtesy. Carmen stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. He's a carpenter. What does he know about managing property or development rights? Please let me finish, Fitzgerald said gently. Roberto goes on to say, I came to this country with nothing but the desire to work hard and build something lasting. I have watched Fernan demonstrate those same values every day. He sees potential where others see problems. He builds rather than destroys. Most importantly, he has never once asked me for anything, even when others in this room have felt entitled to my generosity. Sophia's phone had stopped buzzing. Miguel sat down heavily. Elena stared at the table. The letter concludes, To Carmen, Miguel, and Sophia, I have given you each more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of your lives. To Fernan, I give the chance to build something new, just as I once did. The land will be his to develop or preserve as he sees fit. I trust his judgment more than my own blood in this matter. The explosion of voices that followed was immediate and angry. Miguel accused Fitzgerald of fraud. Carmen demanded to see the original will. Sophia started calculating the lost value on her phone. Elena said nothing, but I could feel her pulling away from me emotionally as well as physically. I understand this is unexpected, Fitzgerald said calmly, but I assure you the will is legal and binding. Roberto was of sound mind when he made these changes, and I have multiple witnesses to attest to that fact. How much land are we talking about? Elena asked quietly. 30 acres of prime development property on the lake. Current market value for development rights alone is estimated at $12 million. With proper planning and environmental approval, the potential value could be significantly higher. $12 million. I'd never even imagined that much money, let alone owned it. I looked around the room at the faces of people I'd considered family. People who just learned that the poor carpenter they tolerated had inherited more than any of them. "This is unacceptable," Carmen declared. Roberto wasn't thinking clearly in his final months. The grief, the medication, it clouded his judgment. "Mrs. Ramirez," Fitzgerald said firmly, "I met with your husband multiple times to discuss this decision. He was lucid, determined, and very specific about his intentions. He also anticipated your reaction, which is why he included additional documentation. He produced another folder. Signed statements from his doctor confirming his mental competency, as well as video testimony recorded just 2 weeks ago. Roberto wanted to ensure there would be no successful challenge to his wishes." Miguel's face had turned red. What gives him the right to destroy our family's legacy over some misguided loyalty to an outsider? "Miguel," I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken since the reading began. "Don't you dare say anything," he snapped. "You've been planning this all along, haven't you? Playing the humble carpenter while manipulating an old man?" "That's enough," Elena said, finally finding her voice. "Papa made his own decisions." "Did he?" Carmen asked. "Or did your husband spend 3 years whispering in his ear, convincing him that his own children didn't deserve their inheritance?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I could see the doubt creeping into Elena's eyes, the way she was starting to look at me like a stranger. These people were experts at planting seeds of suspicion, and they'd had years of practice. "I never asked him for anything," I said. "Of course you didn't," Sophia laughed bitterly. "That would have been too obvious. Instead, you played the long game. The devoted son-in-law who just happened to be there every time Papa needed help with a project, who just happened to share all his interests in woodworking and construction. Because I genuinely enjoyed his company." "How convenient," Miguel said. "And now you're $12 million richer for that enjoyment." I stood up slowly, placing my hands flat on the table. Around me, the family that had grudgingly accepted me for 3 years now stared at me with open hostility. Elena wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mr. Fitzgerald," I said, "I'd like to speak with you privately about the inheritance." Carmen's eyes lit up with hope. "Are you going to do the right thing?" I looked at her for a long moment. "I'm going to do exactly what Don Roberto would have wanted me to do." The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Miguel stormed out, threatening lawsuits. Carmen retreated to her room, claiming she needed to lie down. Sophia immediately called her lawyer, demanding to know about the possibility of contesting the will. Elena and I drove home in silence. The guest house felt different somehow, smaller and more temporary than it had that morning. I made coffee while she sat at the kitchen island, staring at her hands. "Did you know?" she asked finally. "About the will?" "No, I had no idea your father was planning anything like this." "But you spent so much time with him lately, all those Saturday mornings in his workshop." "Because I enjoyed his company, Elena. Because he was the only person in your family who ever treated me like I belonged here." She looked up at me, and I could see the war happening behind her eyes. Part of her wanted to believe me, but the voices of her family were loud and persuasive. They'd been planting doubts about my motives since the day we met. $12 million, Fernan. That's more money than we ever dreamed of having. It's not about the money. How can you say that? Of course it's about the money. Everything is about money with my family. You know that. I set down my coffee mug and moved to stand across from her. Your father knew exactly what he was doing. He saw how they treated me, how they made me feel like an intruder in my own wife's life. He knew they'd never accept me, no matter what I did or how hard I tried. So he decided to punish them by giving their inheritance to you? No, Elena. He decided to give someone a chance to build something meaningful instead of just inheriting it. She shook her head. They're never going to forgive this, any of it. Our marriage, the will, the embarrassment, will be completely cut off from the family. Would that really be such a terrible thing? The question hung between us like a chasm. Elena had never had to choose between her family and me before. Their disapproval had been a constant background noise, but this was different. This was war. "I need some time to think," she said finally. "I'm going to stay at Sophia's tonight." I watched her pack a small bag, moving through our bedroom like she was already planning never to come back. At the door, she paused. "I loved him too, you know, Papa. He was the only one who ever stood up for us." "I know. Then why does this feel like losing him all over again?" After she left, I walked out to the red oak tree where we'd exchanged vows 3 years earlier. It was massive and ancient, its branches spreading wide enough to shelter a dozen people. Don Roberto had told me once that his grandfather planted it as a seedling, back when the land was just wild forest and unfulfilled dreams. I pressed my palm against the rough bark and tried to understand what the old man had been thinking. He'd given me an incredible gift, but he'd also given me a burden. The responsibility of proving that his faith in me wasn't misplaced. The challenge of building something worthy of his sacrifice. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Mama wants to meet tomorrow, says she has a proposition." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "What kind of proposition?" The kind that could fix everything. The next morning, I drove to the main house for what Carmen called a family meeting. I found her in the formal living room, the same room where we'd gathered for the will reading. This time, she was alone. "Fernan," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Thank you for coming. Elena said you had a proposition." Carmen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I've been thinking about this situation, and I believe we can find a solution that benefits everyone involved." She opened a folder on the coffee table between us. "This is a formal offer to purchase the inherited land from you. $12 million plus a bonus of $1 million for your trouble. Enough money for you and Elena to start fresh anywhere you choose." I looked at the papers without touching them. "And in return?" "You sign over the land to the family trust, where it belongs. We avoid a lengthy legal battle, you avoid the burden of managing property you're not equipped to handle, and everyone moves forward with their dignity intact." $13 million. It's a generous offer, Fernan, more than generous. You'd be set for life. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Carmen Ramirez was a master negotiator, a woman who'd spent her life getting what she wanted through a combination of charm and calculated pressure. But there was something desperate in her eyes today, something that told me this offer wasn't as generous as she claimed. "What's the real value of the land, Carmen?" Her smile flickered. "I don't understand what you mean." $13 million is a lot of money for someone like me, but for property with development rights on Lake Morrison, that seems low. Property values are unpredictable, especially with all the environmental regulations these days. There's no guarantee you'd ever see a profit from development, but there's also no guarantee I wouldn't. Carmen's composure cracked slightly. "You're not a developer, Fernan, you're a carpenter. This kind of project requires expertise, connections, capital, things you don't have. Things I could acquire. With what? You don't have the resources to hire architects, lawyers, environmental consultants. You don't have relationships with city planners or zoning boards. You'd be eaten alive by people who've been playing this game their entire lives." She was probably right, but something in her tone suggested she was more worried about my success than my failure. "I appreciate the offer," I said, standing up, "but I think I'll hold on to the land for now." Carmen's mask slipped completely. "You're making a mistake. This family has influence in this community, business relationships, political connections. We can make your life very difficult if you insist on being stubborn." "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check. You think Roberto's sentiment is going to protect you? He's gone, Fernan. It's just you against us now, and you're outnumbered." I walked toward the door, then paused. You know what your husband told me the last time we spoke. He said the biggest mistake he ever made was not standing up to bullies when he was young. He said it took him 50 years to learn that the only way to deal with people who try to intimidate you is to refuse to be intimidated. Roberto was sentimental in his old age. The real world doesn't work that way. I guess we'll find out. I left her sitting in that perfect living room, surrounded by the wealth and status that she thought made her untouchable. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just declared war on people who fought dirty and played for keeps. Elena was waiting in the kitchen when I got back, her face pale and drawn. Mama called. She said you rejected the offer. I did. Fernan, $13 million. We could buy our own house, start our own business, travel the world. We could be free of all this family drama. At what cost? What do you mean? I sat down across from her. Your father didn't leave me that land so I could sell it back to your family for a profit. He left it to me because he trusted me to do something meaningful with it. Like what? You don't know anything about property development. Maybe not yet. But I know about building things. I know about working with my hands to create something that lasts. Isn't that what your father did when he started his construction company? Elena's eyes filled with tears. They're never going to forgive us for this. Miguel called this morning, screaming about how you've destroyed the family. Sophia won't even take my calls. And what did you tell Miguel? I told him I needed time to think. About what? She looked at me with a mixture of love and desperation. About whether our marriage can survive this. About whether I can choose you over them again, knowing what it will cost. The honesty of her answer hit me like a physical blow. I'd always known that Elena's family disapproved of me, but I'd believed that her love was stronger than their influence. Now I was learning that love wasn't always enough. I can't make that choice for you, I said quietly. I know, but I need you to understand what you're asking of me. If we keep the land, if we don't find a way to make peace with my family, I lose everything I've ever known. My relationships, my social connections, my identity as a Ramirez. Is it fair to ask me to give up my entire life for land we never expected to have? And is it fair to ask me to give up the one gift your father ever gave me because your family finds it inconvenient? We stared at each other across the kitchen island, both of us recognizing that we'd reached a crossroads that might not have a path back. I'm going to stay at Sophia's for a few more days, Elena said finally. After she left, I drove out to the 30 acres that had somehow become mine. I'd walked this land dozens of times with Don Roberto, listening to his stories about the wildlife and the changing seasons. He'd shown me the old-growth trees that were too beautiful to cut down, the natural springs that fed into the lake, the gentle slopes that would be perfect for building. Standing there in the fading afternoon light, I tried to imagine what he'd envisioned for this place. Not just houses, but a community. Not just development, but creation. Something that honored the land while serving the people who would call it home. My phone rang. Elena's number. Fernan, there's something you need to know. Miguel hired a private investigator to look into your background. He's trying to find evidence that you manipulated Papa somehow. Let him look. He won't find anything. There's more. They're also exploring legal options to contest the will. Mama thinks they can prove that Papa wasn't competent when he made the changes. I closed my eyes. What do you think, Elena? Was your father competent? A long pause. You know he was. He was sharp until the end. But they're desperate, and desperate people do destructive things. Are you warning me or threatening me? I'm trying to protect you. And them. And us, if there's still in us to protect. That night, I called Harold Fitzgerald at his home number. He answered on the second ring, sounding tired. I've been expecting your call, he said. Carmen and Miguel have already contacted me about contesting the will. Do they have grounds? No. Roberto was meticulous about documentation. But that doesn't mean they won't try. And it doesn't mean the process won't be expensive and time-consuming for you. How expensive? Legal fees could easily run into 6 figures, and if they managed to tie up the inheritance in court, you might not be able to access or develop the land for years. I sat in my workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that represented everything I knew how to do well. Building cabinets and installing hardwood floors suddenly seemed like simple problems compared to navigating family warfare and property law. Mr. Fitzgerald, can I ask you something personal? Why do you think Don Roberto really left me the land? The lawyer was quiet for a moment. Roberto called me 2 weeks before he died. He said he'd spent his whole life building wealth for his family, but he'd never taught them how to build wealth for themselves. He said they saw money as something to be inherited, not earned. He wanted to give someone a chance to prove that success comes from vision and hard work, not just bloodlines. And he thought I could do that? He thought you were the only one in that family who understood what it meant to create something from nothing. After hanging up, I walked through the house Elena and I had shared, looking at all the small improvements I'd made over the years. Custom shelving in the living room, a breakfast nook I'd built by the kitchen window, hardwood floors I'd installed myself, board by board. I'd put my heart into this place because I thought it was our home. Now it felt like borrowed time, a temporary arrangement that had always been subject to change based on the family's convenience. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thought you should see this. Below was a link to an article in the local business journal. The headline read, "Ramirez family challenges late patriarch's will in potential multi-million-dollar dispute." The article was brief but damaging. It painted me as an opportunistic outsider who had manipulated an elderly man in his final months. Miguel was quoted as saying the family was shocked and heartbroken by their father's decision to leave valuable property to someone with no family ties or business experience. Carmen added her own quote, "Roberto was generous to a fault, but this decision doesn't reflect the man we knew. We believe he was taken advantage of during a vulnerable time." I set the phone down and looked around my workshop. Tomorrow, I would start building something new. Not cabinets or bookshelves, but a future. Don Roberto had given me the tools. Now I had to prove I was worthy of his faith. The investigation began within 48 hours of the article's publication. I discovered this when my neighbor Mrs. Chen knocked on my door early Thursday morning, holding a cup of coffee and wearing a concerned expression. "There was a man here yesterday asking questions about you," she said, stepping inside without invitation. Professional-looking fellow with a notepad. "Wanted to know about your work habits, your relationship with Elena, whether you seem to have money troubles." I poured myself coffee, trying to keep my hand steady. "What did you tell him?" "That you're the most reliable contractor I've ever hired, that you treat your wife like gold, and that anyone with eyes could see you work too hard for too little money." She studied my face. "Fernan, what's going on? This has something to do with Don Roberto's passing, doesn't it?" Mrs. Chen had lived next door for 15 years. She'd watched me build my business from nothing, seen me leave for work before dawn and come home after dark covered in sawdust and paint. If Miguel's investigator was talking to her, he was being thorough. "The family is questioning some decisions in Don Roberto's will." Ah, she nodded knowingly. "Rich people problems. They can't stand when money goes somewhere they didn't expect." That afternoon, I received a call from Tony Valdez, a plumber I'd worked with on dozens of jobs over the years. His voice was tight with concern. "Fernan, someone came by the shop asking about you. Wanted to know if you'd ever talked about the Ramirez family money, if you seemed interested in inheritance, that kind of thing." "What did you say?" "I told him you're the most stand-up guy I know, and that you've never talked about anything except getting the work done right. But hermano, this feels serious. What kind of trouble are you in?" I realized then that Miguel wasn't just hiring an investigator. He was conducting a character assassination, trying to build a case that I was a gold digger who had manipulated his father. The strategy was becoming clear. If they couldn't prove Don Roberto was incompetent, they'd try to prove I was a con artist. Elena called that evening while I was reviewing the inheritance paperwork Harold Fitzgerald had given me. "They're asking me to sign an affidavit," she said without preamble. "What kind of affidavit?"
swearing that you talked about Papa's money, that you seemed interested in the inheritance, that you spent time with him specifically to gain his favor. I set down the papers. And what are you going to tell them? I don't know. Her voice was small, defeated. They're my family, Fernan. They raised me, supported me, loved me my whole life. But what they're asking me to do feels wrong. Then don't do it. It's not that simple. If I refuse to sign, they'll see it as choosing you over them. If I do sign, I'm betraying you and Papa's memory. Either way, I lose someone I love. I could hear the tears in her voice, and my heart ached for her. Elena had never been forced to choose sides before. She'd grown up believing that family loyalty and doing the right thing were the same thing. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "I want you to sell them the land. Take the money and let's start over somewhere else, away from all this poison." "And if I can't do that?" A long silence. "Then I guess we both have to live with the consequences." The next morning brought a registered letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. Inside was a cease and desist order demanding that I stop interfering with family business matters and attempting to profit from the emotional manipulation of a deceased elderly man. The language was deliberately inflammatory, designed to intimidate rather than inform. But buried in the legal jargon was a real threat. If I didn't relinquish my claim to the inheritance, they would file both criminal and civil charges against me. I called Harold Fitzgerald immediately. "It's a bluff," he said after I read him the letter. "They're trying to scare you into settling. Criminal charges require evidence of actual wrongdoing, which they don't have. Civil charges require damages, which they can't prove. But they can make my life hell in the meantime." Yes, they can. That's the point. Legal harassment as a negotiation tactic. I spent the weekend walking the 30 acres that had become the center of this war, trying to understand what Don Roberto had seen in this place. The land was beautiful in its undeveloped state, rolling hills covered with native grasses and scattered oak trees. A creek ran along the eastern boundary, feeding into Lake Morrison through a series of small waterfalls. Standing on the highest point, I could see the potential for something special. Not a typical subdivision with cookie-cutter houses, but a community that worked with the natural landscape. Homes that captured the lake views without destroying the environment. Public spaces that brought people together instead of isolating them behind walls. But turning that vision into reality would require expertise I didn't have and resources I couldn't access. Carmen had been right about that much. I was a carpenter, not a developer. Monday morning brought another surprise. I was installing kitchen cabinets for the Henderson family when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. "Mr. Shu, this is Marcus Lang. We met briefly at the Ramirez funeral." Marcus Lang was a developer from San Antonio, someone who'd done business with Don Roberto over the years. I remembered him from the service, a quiet man in an expensive suit who'd spoken briefly with Carmen before leaving. "Mr. Lang, what can I do for you?" "I read about the situation in the business journal. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. I have a proposition that might interest you." We met that afternoon at a small cafe downtown. Marcus was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the confident bearing of someone who'd succeeded in a competitive business. He ordered black coffee and got straight to the point.
Roberto and I worked together on 3 different projects over the past decade. He was one of the smartest developers I've ever known, and one of the most principled. He talked about you quite a bit. He did? He was proud of your work, proud of the way you treated Elena, and frustrated with how his family treated you. He said you had vision but lacked experience. I stirred my coffee, waiting for the pitch I knew was coming. "Here's what I'm thinking," Marcus continued. "You've got 30 acres of prime development property, but you don't have the expertise to develop it. I've got the expertise, but I'm always looking for the right property. We could partner on this." "What kind of partnership?" "You provide the land, I provide the capital and development experience. We split the profits 60-40, with you keeping the majority stake. I handle the permits, the construction, the marketing. You maintain control over the vision and the final decisions." It was a generous offer, more generous than I'd expected. "Why would you do that?" Marcus smiled. "Because Roberto asked me to look out for you if something like this ever happened. He was worried about how his family would react to his will. He knew they'd try to contest it. He knew they'd see you as a threat rather than family. Roberto understood that sometimes the people who deserve an inheritance the least are the ones who expect it the most. I studied Marcus's face, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives, but his proposal seemed straightforward, and his connection to Don Roberto felt genuine. I'll need to think about it, of course, but don't think too long. The family's legal challenge is going to tie up your inheritance for months, maybe years. This partnership could give you the resources to fight back while still moving forward with development. That evening, I found Elena waiting in the kitchen when I got home. She looked exhausted, her usual polished appearance replaced by wrinkled clothes and tired eyes. "I signed the affidavit," she said without looking at me. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Elena, I told them the truth, that you never talked about inheritance, that you genuinely loved spending time with Papa, that your relationship with him was real." She finally met my eyes. "But I also told them that I can't be part of this fight anymore." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm filing for separation. Not divorce, not yet, but legal separation. I need Stace to figure out who I am without my family's voice in my head, and I can't do that while living in the middle of this war." I sat down heavily, feeling the last piece of my old life slip away. "Where will you go?" "I rented a small apartment downtown, just temporary, until we figure out what comes next." "And us? What comes next for us?" Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. I love you, Fernan, but I don't know if love is enough to survive what my family is putting us through." She left that night with 2 suitcases and a promise to call when she was ready to talk. I stood in the doorway watching her drive away, understanding for the first time that winning the inheritance might mean losing everything else that mattered. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal consultations and difficult decisions. Miguel's investigator continued interviewing everyone who'd ever worked with me, looking for any sign that I'd been planning to manipulate his father. The local newspaper picked up the story, turning my private family drama into public entertainment. I started taking a different route to work sites, avoiding the places where I might run into Elena's friends or family. The comfortable anonymity I'd enjoyed as just another contractor was gone, replaced by whispered conversations and curious stares. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I was working late in my shop one evening when I heard a car pull into the driveway. Through the window, I saw a small sedan with an unfamiliar driver. A young woman got out, looking around nervously before knocking on my door. "Mr. Shu, my name is Jessica Martinez. I work at the law firm representing the Ramirez family." I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "What can I do for you?" "I'm a paralegal, and I've been working on the case against you, but there's something you need to know, something that could change everything." She glanced around nervously. "Can we talk inside? What I have to show you could get me fired, but it's the right thing to do." I led her into the kitchen, where she pulled a manila folder from her briefcase. "I've been going through Don Roberto's personal papers, looking for evidence to support the family's claim that he wasn't competent. Instead, I found these." She opened the folder to reveal a stack of handwritten letters, all in Don Roberto's careful script. The first one was dated 3 months before his death. "My dear Fernan," I read aloud, "by the time you read this, I will be gone, and my family will likely be angry with both of us. I want you to understand why I made the decision to leave you the land." My hands trembled as I continued reading. Don Roberto had written detailed letters explaining his reasoning, his disappointment with his children's entitlement, and his hope that I would build something meaningful on the property. "There are 12 letters in total," Jessica said. "He wrote them over several months, documenting his mental state and his decision-making process. He was preparing for exactly what's happening now." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because what the family is doing is wrong. Don Roberto was completely lucid when he wrote these letters. He knew his children would try to contest the will, and he wanted to leave a record of his true intentions. The letters painted a picture of a man who'd spent his final months reflecting on his legacy and the values he wanted to pass down. Fernan doesn't just see the profit potential," one letter read. "He sees the responsibility that comes with owning land. He understands that development should serve the community, not just the developer. Another letter detailed his frustration with his own children's attitudes toward money and inheritance. They act as if wealth is their birthright rather than the result of hard work and smart decisions. They've never built anything themselves, never risked failure, never earned what they have. Jessica gathered the letters carefully. "I'm going to make copies and get them to your attorney. The family doesn't know these exist. They were in Don Roberto's personal safe, and I was the first person to read them. Doesn't this put you at risk?" "Yes, but I can't be part of destroying an innocent man's life. Don Roberto was one of my grandfather's closest friends. He helped our family when we immigrated here. I owe him this much." After she left, I called Harold Fitzgerald at home and told him about the letters. His excitement was audible through the phone. "This changes everything," he said. "These letters prove premeditation and mental competency. They show that Roberto anticipated the family's reaction and wanted to prevent exactly what's happening now." "When do we use them?" "I'll file them with the court tomorrow morning."
This should stop the competency challenge in its tracks. But I knew the letters would do more than just protect the inheritance. They would expose the family's true motivations and probably destroy any chance of reconciliation with Elena. I spent that night reading and rereading Don Roberto's words, understanding for the first time the full weight of what he'd given me. It wasn't just land or money. It was a chance to honor his memory by building something that reflected his values. The next morning, I called Marcus Lang and accepted his partnership offer. If the Ramirez family wanted to fight, I'd fight back. But I'd do it on my own terms, building the kind of community Don Roberto had dreamed of. The partnership agreement was straightforward. Marcus would provide $2 million in development capital, plus access to his team of architects, engineers, and environmental consultants. I would maintain controlling interest in the project and final approval over all major decisions. "What do you want to build?" Marcus asked during our first planning meeting. I pulled out a sketch pad where I'd been drawing ideas for weeks. "Something that honors the land instead of just using it. Homes that work with the natural landscape, not against it. Community spaces that bring people together. A place where families can afford to live, not just wealthy retirees." Marcus studied my rough drawings. Affordable housing doesn't maximize profit. "I'm not trying to maximize profit. I'm trying to maximize value." He smiled. "Roberto said you'd say something like that. Okay, let's design a community that makes money and makes a difference." The news of our partnership broke in the local business journal 2 days later. The headline read, "Local carpenter partners with major developer to transform inherited land." The article was more balanced than the previous coverage, focusing on the potential economic impact of the development rather than the family drama. Carmen's response was swift and predictable. She called a press conference at the country club, surrounded by Miguel and Sofia, all three of them dressed in black as if they were in mourning. "This partnership proves what we've been saying all along," Carmen told the assembled reporters. "Mr. Shu has been planning this development from the beginning. He manipulated my husband's grief and illness to steal land that has been in our family for generations." Miguel added his own comments about the betrayal of family trust and the desecration of his father's memory. Sophia focused on the environmental concerns, claiming that development would destroy the natural habitat around Lake Morrison. But their accusations felt hollow now, especially after Harold Fitzgerald released excerpts from Don Roberto's letters to the press. The local newspaper ran a front-page story with the headline, "Developers' Letters Reveal True Intentions Behind Controversial Will." The excerpts were damaging to the family's case. Don Roberto had written explicitly about his disappointment with their attitudes and his excitement about giving me a chance to build something meaningful. "My children see only dollar signs when they look at the land," one published excerpt read. "Fernan sees potential for creating homes and community. That's the difference between inheritance and earning." Elena called me that night for the first time in 2 weeks. "I saw the newspaper article," she said. Her voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the strain underneath. "The letters were a surprise to me, too." "Were they?" Because some of them mention conversations you had with Papa about development, conversations I don't remember you telling me about. I chose my words carefully. Your father and I talked about a lot of things when we worked together: building, design, community. But I never asked him for anything, Elena. I never even imagined he was thinking about leaving me the land. But you talked about what you'd do with it if you could. We talked about what could be done with it, hypothetically, the way people talk about dreams that seem impossible. A long silence. I want to believe you. Then believe me. It's not that simple anymore. My family is convinced you're a con artist. My friends are asking questions I can't answer. The media is treating our marriage like a business transaction. What do you want me to do, Elena? Give up the land? Walk away from the partnership? Pretend your father's wishes don't matter? I want you to think about what matters more: proving you're right or saving our marriage. The line went dead before I could respond. The next morning brought another surprise. I was meeting with Marcus and his architect when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Elena's number, but the voice was Miguel's. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "I'm listening." Face to face, just you and me. No lawyers, no family, no media. We met at a small diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where working people ate breakfast before heading to construction sites and factories. Miguel looked uncomfortable in his expensive suit, out of place among the coffee-stained coveralls and work boots. "You're destroying my family," he said as soon as I sat down. "I didn't start this fight." "No, but you're escalating it. This partnership, these development plans, the media attention. You're turning a family dispute into a public spectacle." I ordered coffee and studied his face. Miguel had always been the most reasonable of Elena's siblings, the one who occasionally treated me like a person rather than an obstacle. "What do you want, Miguel?" "I want to make a deal. A real deal, not the lowball offer my mother made." He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. $20 million for the land. Cash, no conditions, no strings attached. You can keep the development partnership for other properties. You can build your dream community somewhere else. But you give us back our family's land. $20 million. $7 million more than Carmen's original offer. Enough money to buy my own property and still have resources left over for development. Why the increase? Because this isn't just about money anymore. It's about family. Elena is destroying herself trying to choose between you and us. Sophia hasn't slept in weeks. Mama is talking about selling the main house and moving back to Mexico. And you think giving you the land will fix all that? I think it's the only chance we have of putting this family back together. I looked out the diner window at the parking lot full of pickup trucks and work vans. 6 months ago, I would have been driving one of those trucks, worried about making the next mortgage payment and wondering if I'd ever be able to afford a real vacation. What does Elena think about this offer? Miguel's expression softened. She doesn't know about it. She's barely speaking to any of us right now. But I think she'd support it if it meant ending this war.
And if I say no? Then we keep fighting. The legal challenges, the media coverage, the private investigators. We make your life as difficult as possible until you decide it's not worth it anymore. I drank my coffee slowly, thinking about Don Roberto's letters and his hopes for the land. $20 million would solve a lot of problems, but it wouldn't honor his memory or fulfill his vision. I need time to think about it. You have 24 hours. After that, the offer expires, and we go back to trying to destroy each other. That afternoon, I drove out to the land and walked the trails Don Roberto had shown me over the years. The creek was running high from recent rain, and the wildflowers were beginning to bloom. It was the kind of place that deserved careful stewardship, not just development. I found myself at the old oak tree where Don Roberto used to sit when he wanted to think. Someone had installed a small bench there years ago, weathered now but still solid. I sat down and tried to imagine what he would want me to do. The rational choice was clear. $20 million would set me up for life and end the family war that was destroying Elena. I could find other land to develop, other opportunities to build something meaningful. But taking the money would also validate everything the family had said about me. It would prove that I was just another gold digger who could be bought off when the price was right. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Miguel told me about the offer. We need to talk. I drove to her apartment downtown, a small place above a bookstore that felt temporary and sad. She let me in without a word, moving around the kitchen to make tea like we were strangers being polite. $20 million, she said finally. Yes, that's more money than either of us ever dreamed of having. It is. She turned to face me, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. I can't do this anymore, Fernan. The fighting, the uncertainty, the feeling like I'm betraying someone no matter what I choose. So you want me to take the money. I want you to think about what Papa would really want. Would he want his legacy to be the destruction of his family? Would he want his generosity to cost us our marriage? It was the question I'd been avoiding, the one that cut to the heart of everything. Don Roberto had loved his family, despite their flaws. He'd wanted to teach them a lesson, but he'd never wanted to destroy them. What if there was another way? I asked. What do you mean? What if we could honor your father's wishes and heal the family at the same time? Elena sat down across from me, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in weeks. How? I pulled out my phone and showed her the development plans Marcus and I had been working on. What if, instead of fighting over the land, we made it a family project? Your father wanted someone to build a community there. What if that someone was all of us? Elena studied the drawings, her expression shifting from skepticism to interest. You're talking about bringing the family into the partnership. I'm talking about honoring your father's vision while giving everyone a stake in the outcome. Miguel has business experience. Sophia has connections in environmental consulting. Even your mother has knowledge about the local community. They'll never agree to work with you. Maybe not, but they might agree to work with you. For the first time in weeks, Elena smiled. You want me to be the bridge. I want us to be the bridge. Together. She reached across the table and took my hand. It's a beautiful idea, Fernan, but it would require everyone to swallow their pride and admit they were wrong. Your father's letters prove he was thinking clearly when he made his decision. The family's legal challenge is going to fail. They can keep fighting and lose everything, or they can work with us and share in something bigger than any of them imagined. Elena squeezed my hand. And if they refuse? Then we build the community anyway, and we hope that someday they'll see what we accomplished and understand why your father believed in us. That evening, Elena called a family meeting. She didn't tell them what she wanted to discuss, just that it was important and that everyone needed to be there. We met at the main house, in the same formal living room where the will had been read just a month earlier. Carmen, Miguel, and Sophia gathered with obvious reluctance, their faces showing the strain of the past weeks. Elena stood at the front of the room, while I remained near the door, ready to leave if the meeting turned hostile. I have a proposal, a way for all of us to honor Papa's memory while healing our family. She spread the development plans across the coffee table, explaining our vision for the community and the potential for shared involvement. Papa left the land to Fernan because he believed in his vision, she continued. But that doesn't mean the rest of us can't be part of making that vision real. Carmen's face was skeptical. Are you suggesting we work for him? I'm suggesting we work together, as partners, not employees, as family. Miguel studied the plans carefully. This would require significant investment from all of us, not just money, but time and expertise. And it would require admitting that Papa made the right choice, Sophia added. Elena nodded. Yes, it would. But the alternative is years of legal battles that will cost more than money. They'll cost us each other. The room fell silent as the family absorbed the proposal. I could see the war between pride and pragmatism playing out on their faces. Carmen spoke first. Even if we were willing to consider this, why should we trust him?
How do we know this isn't just another manipulation? Elena looked at me, and I knew it was time to speak. Because, I said quietly, your husband's letters make it clear that this was always his plan. He didn't just want someone to develop the land. He wanted someone to bring the family together in doing it. I pulled out the folder of letters Harold Fitzgerald had given me and selected one I hadn't shared with the media. He wrote this 2 weeks before he died, I said, reading aloud. My greatest regret is that my children have never learned to work together toward a common goal. They compete with each other instead of supporting each other. Perhaps the land can teach them what I failed to teach them myself. The letter continued with specific ideas for how each family member could contribute to a development project, playing to their individual strengths while requiring them to collaborate. He planned this, Sophia said softly. All of it. Miguel looked up from the development plans. What kind of partnership are you proposing? Equal shares for everyone, I replied. The land is my contribution. Each of you brings something else. Money, expertise, connections, community knowledge. We all share in the profits, and we all share in the responsibility. Carmen shook her head.
This is insane. We've been fighting each other for weeks, and now you want us to go into business together? I want us to honor Don Roberto's real wishes, Elena said. Not just the letter of his will, but the spirit of what he was trying to accomplish. The debate that followed was intense, but not hostile. For the first time since the will reading, the family was talking about possibilities instead of just problems. Miguel saw the business potential. Sophia was intrigued by the environmental sustainability aspects. Even Carmen began asking practical questions about permits and timelines. But it was the final letter that sealed the decision. Elena read it aloud, her voice shaking with emotion. To my beloved family, if you are reading this together, then perhaps my plan has worked. The land was never the real inheritance. The real inheritance is learning to build something together, as a family. Fernan is not your enemy. He is your opportunity to remember what it means to work towards something bigger than yourselves. When she finished reading, the room was silent except for the sound of Carmen quietly crying. Damn him, she whispered. Even dead, he's still teaching us lessons. Miguel was the first to speak. All right, I'm in. But I want to see detailed financial projections, and I want oversight of the construction contracts. Sophia nodded slowly. I'll handle the environmental impact studies and community outreach, but I want guarantees about preserving the natural habitat. All eyes turned to Carmen. She sat with the letter in her hands, reading it again silently. He really did plan all of this, she said finally. The will, the partnership offer, even this meeting. He knew exactly how we'd react and exactly what it would take to bring us back together. So? Elena asked gently. Carmen looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. Not quite acceptance, but the beginning of it. I suppose if I'm going to have a son-in-law who owns 30 acres of prime real estate, I might as well make sure he develops it properly. It wasn't an apology, but it was enough. We spent the next 3 hours working out the basic framework of our partnership. It would be complicated, requiring lawyers and accountants and probably several more family meetings. But for the first time since Don Roberto's death, we were building something instead of tearing it down. Elena and I drove home together that night, returning to the guest house we'd shared before everything changed. The place felt different now, more like a beginning than an ending. Do you think it will work? She asked, as we stood in our kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd argued about family loyalty and impossible choices. I think your father knew us better than we knew ourselves, I replied. He understood that the only way to heal the family was to give us something meaningful to work on together. Elena smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached her eyes. He was always 10 steps ahead of everyone else. Still is, apparently. That night, we sat on our small porch, looking out at the 30 acres that had nearly destroyed our family and might yet save it. In the distance, I could see the lights of the main house, where Carmen, Miguel, and Sophia were probably still arguing about details and logistics. But they were arguing together now, as family. And somewhere in the darkness, Don Roberto's vision was finally beginning to take shape. 6 months later, I stood on the highest point of what would soon become Esperanza Heights, watching the morning sunrise over Lake Morrison. The construction crews had already begun their work, and the sound of machinery mixed with birdsong as we carefully balanced development with preservation. The architectural plans spread across the hood of my truck showed a community unlike any other in the region. 47 homes designed to work with the natural landscape, each one capturing lake views while preserving the mature oak trees. The community center Elena had designed sat at the heart of the development, with solar panels gleaming on its roof and gardens stretching toward the water. The environmental impact report came back clean, Sophia called out, walking up the hill with her tablet in hand. She'd thrown herself into the sustainability aspects of the project with the same intensity she'd once applied to our family arguments. The creek restoration is ahead of schedule, and the wildlife corridors are already showing increased bird activity. Sophia had surprised everyone, including herself, with how passionate she'd become about sustainable development. Her consulting firm now handled environmental planning for 3 other projects in the region. Miguel's voice crackled through my radio. Foundation crew needs your approval on the community center footings. They're ready to pour concrete, but they want to verify the depth with you first. I drove down to the construction site where Miguel was deep in conversation with the foreman. He'd taken over project management with the efficiency of someone who'd found his calling. The MBA that had once made him seem arrogant now proved invaluable in coordinating contractors, managing budgets, and keeping everything on schedule. "Foundation looks solid," I said after inspecting the work. "Your father would have been proud of the quality." Miguel paused in his note-taking. He would have been proud of all of this, especially the way we're working together. The legal challenges had been dropped 4 months earlier when Harold Fitzgerald presented the complete collection of Don Roberto's letters to the court. The judge had not only validated the will, but commended the family for finding a way to honor the deceased's true intentions. Carmen had become our unofficial community liaison, using her social connections to promote the development and secure pre-sales. She'd discovered a talent for marketing that none of us had expected, turning her previous skepticism into enthusiasm that potential buyers found infectious. "Mrs. Chen wants to be one of the first residents," Carmen announced, arriving at the site in her pristine white Cadillac. "She says if it's good enough for the man who built her kitchen cabinets, it's good enough for her." I smiled, remembering my elderly neighbor who'd defended my character to Miguel's investigator. The affordable housing component of Esperanza Heights had been Elena's idea, ensuring that people like Mrs. Chen could afford to live in the community I was creating. Elena emerged from the model home where she'd been meeting with interior designers. She wore work clothes now instead of the designer outfits her mother had always preferred, and she'd never looked more beautiful to me. "The Martinez family wants to put in an offer on Lot 17, she said, joining our group. "They love that it backs up to the nature preserve." Elena had discovered her own passion in the project, focusing on affordable housing design and community integration. She'd gone back to school to study sustainable architecture, approaching her education with the determination of someone who'd found her purpose. "That's the 3rd offer this week," Miguel noted. "We're selling faster than I projected." The success had surprised everyone except Marcus Lang, who'd predicted that the combination of quality construction, environmental responsibility, and community focus would create strong demand. "Roberto knew this would work," Marcus had told me during our last partners meeting. "He understood that people want more than just a house. They want to belong to something meaningful." I spent the afternoon walking through the development with Marcus, discussing plans for the 2nd phase. The partnership had evolved beyond just financial backing. Marcus had become a mentor, teaching me about development finance and regulatory navigation while respecting my vision for community-focused building. "You've changed the way I think about development," he admitted, as we stood beside the creek that would soon be lined with walking paths. Native plants lined the banks, and fish had already returned to waters that had been stagnant for years. That evening, the family gathered for our weekly dinner at the main house. It had become a tradition, these Sunday meals where we discussed project updates and shared stories about potential residents. Carmen cooked, something she hadn't done in years, claiming that catered meals lacked the personal touch that family dinners required. "The Hendersons visited the model home today," Elena reported over dessert. "They're the family whose kitchen you renovated last year, Fernan. They said they trust your work quality and want to be part of what you're building." It was moments like these that reminded me why Don Roberto's plan had been so brilliant. He hadn't just given me land or money.
He'd given his family a reason to see me not as an outsider, but as someone who could help them build something together. The newspaper wants to do a follow-up story, Miguel mentioned. 6 months after the controversy, they want to show how the project has evolved. Carmen nodded approvingly. Good publicity helps with sales, and it shows the community that we're serious about honoring Roberto's vision. Sophia looked up from her tablet, where she'd been reviewing environmental monitoring data.
The water quality tests from the lake are showing improvement already. Reducing runoff and restoring natural filtration is working. After dinner, Elena and I walked back to our house, taking the path that wound through what would soon be the community's central park. The guest house felt like home again, transformed from a temporary refuge into the place where we'd chosen to build our future. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd taken Miguel's money and walked away? Elena asked as we sat on our porch. Sometimes, but then I remember your father's letters, and I know we made the right choice. Elena curled up beside me, her head resting on my shoulder. He really did see all of this, didn't he? The fighting, the reconciliation, even us falling in love with the project. He saw what we could become if we stopped focusing on what divided us and started working toward what could unite us. The first residents would move in within 3 months. Mrs. Chen had already picked out paint colors for her kitchen and asked if I'd build her some custom cabinets. The Martinez family was planning a garden that would connect to the community greenhouse Sophia had designed. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. City Planning Board approved the second phase. 40 more homes plus the elementary school. Roberto's vision keeps expanding. The elementary school had been Elena's idea, a way to ensure that Esperanza Heights would attract young families and create the kind of multi-generational community Don Roberto had described in his letters. I have something for you, Elena said, disappearing into the house and returning with a small wrapped package. Inside was a wooden picture frame, hand-carved with intricate detail. The photo showed Don Roberto and me working together in his shop, both of us focused on a cabinet he'd commissioned for Elena's birthday. I found it in Papa's workshop, she explained. He had it made specially, but he never gave it to me. I think he was saving it for when the project was finished. I studied the photo, remembering that afternoon when her father had talked about legacy and the importance of building things that lasted beyond a single generation. He knew, I said quietly. Even then, he knew this day would come. Elena smiled. He knew you'd honor his trust. He knew we'd find our way back to each other. And he knew that the family would eventually see what he saw in you. The next morning brought news that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. Carmen called to tell me that she'd received an offer from a luxury development company to purchase the main house and surrounding land for $30 million. I'm turning them down, she announced when I arrived for our meeting. This family has already lost too much to money. I won't lose what we've built together. The conversation took place in Don Roberto's old office, surrounded by the tools and plans that had shaped his career. Carmen had preserved the space exactly as he'd left it, down to the half-finished sketches on his drafting table. Besides, she continued with a sly smile, I'm having too much fun watching my son-in-law become the most successful developer in the county. It was the first time she'd called me her son-in-law without making it sound like an insult. Later that day, I received a call from Jessica Martinez, the paralegal who'd risked her job to show me Don Roberto's letters. She'd left the law firm and started her own practice, specializing in estate planning and family business succession. I have clients now who want to create their own version of what you've built, she told me. Families who want to use wealth to bring people together instead of drive them apart. The story of Esperanza Heights had spread beyond our small community, inspiring other developers to think differently about community building and family legacy. That evening, Elena and I drove to the cemetery where Don Roberto was buried. We brought fresh flowers and a photo of the groundbreaking ceremony, where all 4 of his children had worked together to turn the first shovel of dirt. I hope he can see what we've accomplished, Elena said. I think he can, and I think he's probably planning our next challenge. Elena laughed. What makes you think there's a next challenge? I pulled out a letter I'd found in his workshop that morning, one that Jessica had missed in her original discovery. It was addressed to Elena and me jointly, with instructions to open it only after the first residents moved into Esperanza Heights. Knowing your father, this is just the beginning.
3 months later, we gathered the entire family to read Don Roberto's final letter. The first phase of Esperanza Heights was complete. Mrs. Chen had moved into her new home, and the community was thriving exactly as he'd envisioned. "My dear children," Elena read aloud, "if you're reading this together, then you've learned the most important lesson I ever tried to teach you. Wealth isn't something you inherit, it's something you create together with your hands and hearts and shared commitment to building something bigger than yourselves." The letter continued with details for a charitable foundation focused on sustainable community development, funded by the profits from Esperanza Heights and managed by the family as a team. "Fernan," the letter concluded, "you've proven worthy of the trust I placed in you. But more importantly, you've helped my family rediscover what it means to work together toward a common purpose. The land was never the real gift. The real gift was showing them what they could accomplish when they stopped competing and started collaborating." As Elena finished reading, I looked around at the faces of people who'd once seen me as an outsider trying to steal their inheritance. Now they saw me as family, and I saw them the same way. Miguel stood up and raised his coffee cup. "To Papa, who was always 10 steps ahead of the rest of us." "To Papa," we echoed, and for the first time since his death, the toast felt like a celebration rather than a mourning. 6 years later, I stood in the same spot where I'd first read Don Roberto's final letter, but the view had changed dramatically. Esperanza Heights had grown into a model community of 300 homes with a waiting list that stretched for months. The elementary school buzzed with children's laughter, and the community center hosted everything from business seminars to wedding receptions. Elena appeared beside me, her architectural degree now completed and her own sustainable design firm thriving. She carried blueprints for our newest project, affordable housing development in the neighboring county that would follow the Esperanza Heights model. "The groundbreaking is scheduled for next month," she announced. "Miguel secured the construction loans, Sophia's completed the environmental assessments, and Mama's already pre-sold 30% of the units." Carmen had become the region's most effective marketing agent for sustainable development, using her social connections and newfound passion for community building to promote projects throughout the state. "And Marcus?" I asked. "Already committed to the partnership. He says Roberto's model is the future of development, and he wants to be part of it." That evening, our extended family gathered for Sunday dinner at the main house, as we had every week for the past 6 years. The tradition had grown to include our closest friends from Esperanza Heights, creating the kind of multi-generational community Don Roberto had envisioned. Mrs. Chen was there, bringing homemade cookies and stories about her new neighbors. The Martinez family shared updates about their teenagers' acceptance to college on a scholarship from the Roberto Ramirez Foundation. Marcus brought his own family, including a daughter who was studying environmental engineering and wanted to join Sophia's consulting firm. As I looked around the table at the faces of people who'd become family by choice rather than birth, I understood the depth of Don Roberto's final gift. He hadn't just given me land or money or even acceptance. He'd given all of us the chance to discover what we could build together when we stopped focusing on what we might lose and started imagining what we could create. Elena caught my eye and smiled, the same smile that had captured my heart 8 years earlier when her family still saw me as a carpenter who didn't belong in their world. Now I was still a carpenter, but one who'd learned that the most important things you build aren't made of wood and stone. They're made of trust and shared purpose and the willingness to see potential where others see only problems. After dinner, Elena and I walked back to our house through the community we'd helped create. The streetlights illuminated families taking evening walks, neighbors talking over garden fences, and children playing in yards that connect seamlessly to shared green spaces. "Do you think Papa knew it would grow this big?" Elena asked. "I think he knew it would grow as big as we were willing to dream." We sat on our porch, looking out at lights scattered across the hillside like stars that had decided to settle down and build something permanent. Somewhere in the distance, construction crews were preparing the ground for the next phase of expansion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that community and profit could coexist. But tonight, it was enough to sit beside the woman I loved in the place we built together, surrounded by the legacy of a man who'd understood that the greatest inheritance isn't what you leave behind, it's what you inspire others to create. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.